Welcome to the deep dive. Today, you and I are really jumping into a fascinating figure, Zulqarnain, mentioned in the Quran. A bit enigmatic, wouldn't you say?
Definitely enigmatic. There's a lot there.
And we know listeners want to get a solid understanding, kind of quickly but also thoroughly. So
Yeah.
that's our plan today. Unpack the Quranic story, look at historical ideas, maybe some archaeology.
And his role in Islamic eschatology, the end time stuff, all without getting too overwhelming, hopefully.
Exactly. So our main text is Surah Al-Kahfi, right? Verses 83 to 98.
That's the core, yeah. But we'll definitely be pulling in historical views, interpretations over the centuries, kind of a mix of scripture and history.
And straight off, you have these big questions like, who was this guy? A prophet? A king? Something else? And the name Zulqarnain, the one with two horns. What's that about? And maybe most importantly for this deep dive, what did this ancient story actually mean for us today?
Big questions. So let's start right at the source, the Quran itself, Surah Al-Kahfi.
Okay, lay the groundwork for us.
Right. So verses 18.83 to 101. It's good to remember why these verses came down. Apparently, people are asking Prophet Muhammad about him.
People like who?
Maybe the people of the book, Jews and Christians, or possibly the polytheists in Mecca, kind of testing his knowledge.
Ah, okay.
And Allah tells the prophet to share some account of him. That phrase, some account, is interesting. It suggests Zulqarnain was already a figure people were talking about, you know?
Right, not totally unknown. And the Quran paints him as pretty special from the get-go.
Absolutely. A righteous servant, a king.
Mm-hmm.
Given power, sure, but also crucially, a way to achieve everything.
That way to achieve everything, that sounds like more than just brute force, like strategy, wisdom.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It implies having the means, the know-how, the resources to actually get things done effectively, not just sitting on a throne.
So what did the scholars make of him? Was he definitely a king?
Well, the main view is a just, righteous king, but, interpretations vary. Some wondered if he was a prophet, maybe even an angel.
An angel.
Yeah, it's been discussed. There are even some narrations, maybe less common, suggesting he lived around Prophet Ibrahim's time, embraced Islam then, and even did tawaf at the Kaaba with him.
Wow. That really elevates his status.
It shows how highly regarded he is in Islamic tradition.
Okay, so let's dig into the qualities the Quran highlights. You mentioned power.
Yes, real power on earth. Authority, but also the ability to make things happen, and a vast knowledge, wisdom, that's tied directly to that idea of taking away or finding a means.
So he is actively using his intellect, his resources.
Right, it's strategic. And fundamental to his role is justice, no oppression. The Quran makes that clear.
Justice and also mercy, right? I remember something about an encounter in the West.
Yes, mercy towards the weak. So his first big journey mention is westward. He reaches the setting place of the sun.
Metaphorical, presumably, or literal.
Interpreters discuss that, but the point is he reaches a far western point and finds a community there. And Allah gives him authority.
Authority to do what?
To either punish them or treat them kindly. It's a test of his judgment.
And what does he choose?
He chooses justice. He decides to punish the wrongdoers, but reward those who believe and do good. It sets the tone for his leadership. It's ethical, based on clear principles.
That's very revealing.
Okay.
So after the West, he goes east.
Correct. The next journey is to the rising place of the sun, another far-flung place.
And he finds different people there.
Yeah, a group described as having no shelter from the sun, very exposed, perhaps primitive or living in harsh conditions.
And what happens there? Is there another judgment?
Actually, no. The Quran sort of notes Allah's complete awareness of Zulqarnain's situation, but the focus shifts. It contrasts with the West, showing the sheer variety of people and places he encountered. The vastness of his realm, maybe?
It really paints a picture of a massive sphere of influence.
Yeah.
But the story everyone knows.
Yeah.
That's Ya'juj and Ma'juj. Gog and Magog.
Exactly. That's probably the most famous part. He travels again and arrives between two mountains. And there, a group of people approach him. They're suffering because of Ya'juj and Ma'juj. They cause great corruption, destruction.
And they ask Zulqarnain for help.
They plead for protection. They even offer to pay him to build a barrier.
And the Quran describes how he builds it.
It does in some detail, using blocks of iron, filling the gaps, and then pouring molten copper over it. A really strong, formidable barrier.
Iron and copper. That sounds quite advanced.
It does. Some have seen this as him being incredibly technologically skilled, maybe even the father of metallurgy in Islam, or perhaps it was divine guidance showing him how.
And did he take their payment?
No, he refused. This is a key moment showing his character. He says something like, "What my Lord has provided me is better.
Humility again.
And piety. He attributes his ability and success to Allah. He doesn't want personal reward. He's focused on helping them. He even teaches them how to help build it.
So it's leadership by example, empowering others too.
Very much so. He comes up with this effective solution, showing wisdom and great problem-solving skills against a major threat.
But the story doesn't quite end there for Ya'juj and Ma'juj, does it? They get out eventually.
That's right. The verses right after 99-101 mention their future release. It will happen when Allah wills it.
And that's tied to the end times.
Exactly. Their release is stated as one of the major signs that the Day of Judgment is approaching. So, Zulqarnain's actions, building the wall centuries ago,
have implications for the very end of the world.
Precisely. It connects this ancient story to the grand sweep of Islamic eschatology, part of a larger divine plan.
Wow. That's quite a legacy. Okay, so the narrative is powerful.
Hmm.
But the question that hangs in the air, who was he historically? Alexander the Great often comes up.
He does. It's probably the most historically famous connection people try to make.
Why? What's the argument for Alexander?
Well, the similarities in the stories, mainly. Alexander's massive conquests reached east and west, kind of like Zulqarnain's journeys. And there are legends, particularly in later Greek and Syriac traditions, about Alexander building a great wall against barbarian tribes, sometimes identified with Gog and Magog.
Okay, so there are narrative parallels. But what about the arguments against? You hinted at a big one earlier.
The huge one is religion. Alexander the Great historically was a polytheist. He worshipped Greek gods, was declared son of Zeus Ammon.
Which is the complete opposite of the Quran's Zulqarnain.
Exactly. The Quran emphasizes he was a believer in the one God, a righteous servant. Scholars like Ibn Taymiyyah strongly refuted the Alexander identification precisely on these grounds. Their core beliefs were fundamentally different. Plus, Ibn Taymiyyah argued Alexander never even reached the specific wall the Quran describes.
That seems like a pretty major contradiction to overlook. So if not Alexander, who's the next main candidate, Cyrus the Great.
Yes, Cyrus the Great, the founder of the Persian Achaemenid Empire. This identification has gained more traction among many modern Muslim scholars.
Why Cyrus? What makes him better fit, potentially?
Several things. His empire was vast, stretching east and west. He's known historically for being a relatively just and tolerant ruler, especially for his time.
And his religion, was he monotheistic?
That's debated among historians, but there's evidence suggesting he might have been influenced by Zoroastrianism, which has monotheistic elements. Crucially, he's viewed very positively in Jewish tradition.
Right, the Old Testament connection.
Exactly. The Book of Daniel has that vision of a ram with two horns, symbolizing Media and Persia united under Cyrus. And the Jews revered him for freeing them from Babylon and letting them rebuild their temple. This image of a just, possibly monotheistic ruler resonates more closely with Zulqarnain.
And wasn't there something physical? A statue?
Yes. There's a stone relief, a carving, found at Pasargadae in Iran, believed to depict Cyrus. And on his head is a crown with what look like two prominent horns, similar to an Egyptian style, but interpreted by some as aligning with the two-horned title.
Okay, that's quite intriguing. But is the evidence definitive for Cyrus?
No, not definitive. While the parallels are stronger in some ways than Alexander the Justice, the potential monotheism, the horns imagery, there's no direct smoking gun proof. We don't have ancient sources explicitly saying Cyrus built that specific wall against Ya'juj and Ma'juj as described in the Quran.
So it's still interpretation, linking historical details to the Quranic narrative.
Precisely. It fits better for many, but it's not absolutely proven historical fact connecting all the dots.
Were there other people suggested? Beyond Alexander and Cyrus?
Oh yeah, a few others pop up in classical commentaries and later discussions. Some suggested an ancient king from Himyar in Yemen, partly because they use the title Du a lot.
Like Du Nuwas, for example.
Sort of, yeah, that style of name. Others thought maybe Prophet Solomon, Suleiman because of his vast kingdom and power, even some less common ideas, like a Roman figure or an ancient Arab leader.
So a whole range of possibilities have been thrown around over the centuries.
Definitely. It really highlights that the exact historical identity has remained uncertain, leading to lots of different interpretations.
It seems nailing down one person is tricky. Let's talk about the story itself across cultures. We mentioned Greek myths about Alexander. How does the Islamic story compare overall?
Well, you see these echoes, these narrative similarities, especially with the Alexander legends reaching the world's end, building a barrier against barbarians. That basic story structure seems to have circulated.
But the meaning is different in the Islamic version.
Absolutely. Key difference. Zulqarnain in the Quran is fundamentally defined by his monotheism, his justice, his submission to Allah. Alexander in the Greek sources, much more varied a conqueror, sometimes brilliant, sometimes flawed, often depicted as polytheistic or seeking divine status himself.
And the name itself, Zulqarnain, seems to have existed before Islam.
That's a really important point. The title seems to have been around in Persian and Jewish traditions, possibly linked to Cyrus, as we discussed with the ram's horns vision.
So the prophet's audience might have already had some concept associated with that name.
It seems likely yes, which might be why they asked about him. The Quran then takes this existing title or figure and presents the definitive, divinely revealed account of who he truly was and what he represented.
Okay, and the meaning of two horns. What are the main ideas there?
Several interpretations. One common classical view was that it meant he reached the two horns of the sun, the furthest points east and west of the known world.
Like the edges of the earth?
Sort of, yeah. Others thought it was literal. Maybe he had two locks of hair or braids that looked like horns, or perhaps a helmet or crown with two horns. Horns were a common symbol of power and kingship in the ancient Near East.
Like Alexander being depicted with the horns of Ammon.
Exactly, that kind of symbolism. And then there's the Old Testament link we mentioned, the ram with two horns representing the Medo-Persian kingdom, likely under Cyrus. So the title itself is rich with potential meanings.
It's fascinating how a single title can hold so many layers. Okay, let's switch gears slightly. Archaeology. Has it found anything concrete? A grave? The wall?
Yeah, the search for physical evidence is tantalizing, but ultimately frustrating, maybe. There's no definitive proof locking down Zulqarnain's identity.
Nothing solid.
Not really. We mentioned the Cyrus statue with horns suggestive, but not proof. There are mentions by early scholars, like Al-Hamdani, of a place in Abha, Saudi Arabia called the Grave of Zulqarnain, and maybe an old mosque nearby attributed to him.
But that's more like local tradition.
Exactly. Interesting, but hard to verify historically or archaeologically as the place.
So no body, no confirmed tomb. What about the wall? That sounds like something substantial someone might find.
You'd think so. The Great Wall of China often gets brought up because it's, well, enormous.
But does it fit the description?
Not really when you look closely. The materials the Quran specifies iron and molten copper. The Great Wall is mostly stone, earth, wood, etc., and its construction history is very different, built over many centuries by different dynasties. It doesn't seem to match the Quran's account of a single specific barrier built relatively quickly.
Okay, so probably not the Great Wall. Any other candidates?
A more plausible geographical candidate mentioned in the sources is the Derbent Wall.
Where's that?
In the Caucasus region, between the Caspian Sea and the mountains. It's in modern-day Dagestan, Russia.
And why is that a better fit?
Well, its location fits the between two mountains description geographically. It's a natural bottleneck. And there are ancient fortifications there, dating back to periods that could be relevant, particularly the Sasanian Persian era.
So the timing and location are plausible.
More plausible, yes. They've found ancient Sasanian inscriptions there. And interestingly, there are local legends in the Caucasus about Alexander's gates being built in that area precisely to keep out tribes associated with Gog and Magog.
Ah, so even if the legend names Alexander, it points to that specific place as the location of a legendary barrier.
Exactly. It adds a layer of geographical plausibility to that region being the site, even if we can't definitively say Zulqarnain built the Sasanian wall there. It's the best fit we have, maybe.
Still not conclusive, but closer. Okay, let's zoom out again. Zulqarnain's main job in the story seems to be building that wall against Ya'juj and Ma'juj. How does that fit into the bigger picture of Islamic belief, especially about the future?
It's absolutely central to his role. He's the one chosen by Allah to provide this temporary protection. The wall he builds is described as incredibly strong, effectively containing Ya'juj and Ma'juj for a long period.
But not forever.
Not forever. The Quran and Hadith are clear. The breaching of that wall is a major sign. When Allah wills it, Ya'juj and Ma'juj will be released, swarming across the earth.
And that signals.
It's one of the major signs signaling the imminent approach of the Day of Judgment, the hour. There are hadith mentioning the Prophet seeing a small breach in the wall in his time, indicating that the end times were drawing nearer even then.
So Zulqarnain isn't just a figure from the past. His actions are directly linked to the unfolding of cosmic events.
Precisely. He plays a crucial role in the divine timeline, connecting history with eschatology.
It adds such depth. Finally, how do scholars and believers approach interpreting this story today? What are the different ways people try to understand it?
Broadly, you can see a few approaches. One is thematic. What lessons can we learn?
Like focusing on the moral of the story.
Exactly. Sometimes called Maudhui interpretation. It looks for the wisdom, the values, justice in leadership, using power responsibly. The need to plan and use means sabab, humility, trusting in Allah. The goal is practical guidance for life.
So less about who he was, more about what he represents.
Right. Then there's the historical and narrative analysis we've been discussing, trying to identify the historical person, comparing the Qur'an with other sources, analyzing the story's structure in the surah, the language used.
Was it detective work, basically?
Kind of, yeah, trying to piece together the historical puzzle.
And is there a third way?
Well, maybe less a separate method and more an overarching principle, interpreting within the bounds of faith.
Yeah, what exactly?
Meaning, ensuring any interpretation aligns with core Islamic beliefs. It shouldn't contradict clear Quranic verses or established teachings from the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. The main aim should always be beneficial knowledge, things that strengthen faith and improve one's life and relationship with God, not just, dry historical facts for their own sake.
It's a reminder that this is scripture, not just history or legend.
Absolutely. It's guidance.
Okay. Well, we've certainly taken a deep dive today. We've gone through the Quranic account in Surah Al-Kahfi, really looked hard at the historical candidates like Alexander and Cyrus.
We explored the two horns, meaning the archaeological hints or lack thereof, mostly.
Right, like the Derbent Wall possibility. And we touched on his huge role in eschatology with Yajuj and Majuj.
And it seems clear, after all this discussion, that while pinning down his exact historical name is, still debated.
The lessons from his story are incredibly powerful and timeless.
Without a doubt, the principles of just leadership, faith, relying on Allah, using power for good, those resonate regardless of whether he was Cyrus or someone else entirely.
So maybe the final thought for everyone listening, think about those qualities the Quran highlights in Zulqarnain: justice, power used wisely, knowledge, faith, humility. What can we take from his example? How does it apply to our lives, the challenges we face?
Yeah, and could that ambiguity about his specific identity actually be deliberate? Maybe it pushes us to focus less on the who and more on the timeless principles he embodied.
Something to definitely reflect on. Maybe go back and read those verses in Surah Al-Kahfi again with these ideas in mind. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.